Hello. So in the last video that I did, I reviewed the Decathlon 4-class MT100 Down Jacket, and I think that is a pretty good jacket. But where I live, it's not uncommon for the weather to be like this, and once down gets wet, it loses most of its insulation properties. And so at the same time I was testing that one, I was also testing this, which has a artificial insulation made from polyester. And it might just be the better jacket. Now, better is a bit of a subjective term, so I need to be a little bit more specific in what I'm actually measuring. So when it comes to a winter jacket, my primary concern is that it's going to be warm, that it's going to keep me warm if it gets wet. If it does get wet, it's going to dry relatively quickly, and also that it's going to be reasonably windproof. Now, my secondary priorities are going to be the pack size in terms of how packable it is and the weight of the jacket as well. And the reason they're secondary is because it doesn't matter how light a jacket is or how small it packs down if it's not actually going to keep me warm. So let's just get it out there right from the beginning. This jacket is heavier than the Decathlon Down Jacket, about 60% heavier in fact. And while that may sound like a lot, because the Decathlon Down Jacket is so light to begin with, it's actually only 180 grams heavier, and 509 grams for a winter jacket isn't exactly what I'd call heavy. But if weight is your primary concern, then you'd be better off with a Decathlon jacket, because that is objectively the lighter jacket. In terms of packability, this one isn't quite as small as the Decathlon Down Jacket. It will compress smaller than this if you had a compression sack, but it's definitely larger than the Decathlon one is. The big advantage of this one though over the Decathlon in terms of packability is this one does come with its own stuff sack, while the Decathlon one doesn't. You actually fit into the pocket, and that zip on the pocket does feel a little bit fragile. So yeah, a little bit larger, but I think it packs away easier. It does take up a little bit more space, unfortunately. So that's 2-0 to the Decathlon Down Jacket so far. But where this jacket really shines, and what's most important to me during winter, is that it's objectively a lot warmer. Now, when I tested this jacket, I tested it on the same day that I tested the Decathlon. It was 6 degrees Celsius outside, and I wore a thermometer, which is Bluetooth, strapped to my chest, so I could take a reading from my phone of the temperature inside the jacket without having to undo the jacket and kind of compromise that reading. Now, while the Decathlon at the start of the walk was 25 degrees Celsius, the temperature inside this one was 29. So that's 4 degrees warmer, which, you definitely do feel. Now, when I got to the top of Holy Hill, where I was doing the wind test, the temperature in this one dropped down to 22 degrees Celsius, while the Decathlon was 23. So it was 1 degree cooler. However, to be fair, the wind had picked up considerably in between testing both of the jackets, and it was a lot windier then. So I've got to call that wind test inconclusive. Now, at the end of the walk, and I walked the same route on both runs, then the inside of this jacket was 27 degrees Celsius, while the Decathlon was 25. So it was 2 degrees warmer. Another advantage this jacket has is because the insulation is polyester wadding, it will keep me warm even if it gets saturated wet, because polyester wadding maintains its kind of insulation properties when wet, while the Decathlon Down Jacket and down jackets in general, once they get wet, they lose most of those insulation properties. Now, I know someone's going to comment that, down isn't intended to get wet, but the reality is when you live in UK conditions like this, where we have very wet winters, things get wet whether you intend them to or not. So it's only right and proper that we consider that when we're choosing a jacket. Related to that, this jacket is much faster drying relative to down. If you get down wet, then you're going to have a real hard time trying to dry that outside. Well, this one is going to be a lot easier. And the reason for that is polyester filling is actually hydrophobic. It just doesn't absorb moisture the same way that down does. And the other day I went out in this when it was a really wet day. The outside of the jacket got completely saturated as part of the testing that I was doing. And while this isn't marketed as a waterproof coat, I did stay dry on this occasion. More importantly, I stayed nice and warm. But when I got home, I just hung the jacket on the back of a chair, and within an hour or two, it was dry. So this is definitely a lot easier to dry than down is. And so objectively, this jacket is warmer and it's also better suited for wet conditions. But what about the price? Well, it's actually an astonishing £23, which I think is incredible value for what this jacket offers. But if you want to find out who it's actually made by, then you're going to have to watch until the end of the video. Now, like the Decathlon Down Jacket, this one isn't perfect either. And let's go through some of the things that I've had to kind of cut in order to, hit that price point of £23. Now, the first one is the zip. With the Decathlon, it's a very fine zip and the edges are very close, so you hardly see the teeth. With this one, they've gone for a very big chunky zip. There is a wind baffle behind there to try and keep the wind out and also to keep the heat in, but they have omitted the zip guard, so there's no kind of little strip here to stop the zip catching. That said, because they've gone for the big chunky zip, this doesn't catch anyway, and that hasn't been a problem on this jacket. What has been a problem is the little toggles they have here are very small. It's not too bad on the main zip, but on the side pockets here, it is very small indeed. And unfortunately, they don't have the zip pulls, little pieces of material that you can use to kind of close the zips. Now, while that might sound like a really small detail, it's actually quite a big deal because it makes them a lot harder to open when you're wearing gloves. And I find if I've got my big chunky brown gloves on, that I can't actually open or close the side pockets at all, and I need to take my gloves off to go into my pocket. So that is quite a big disadvantage. I can just about manage the big zip, but again, it would be better and it wouldn't be expensive to just have a zip pull on there. The other thing that's missing from this jacket is obviously a hood as well. So this jacket doesn't have a hood, it has a low collar. Now, they do a version that has a hood. I think that was £30, I think it was. And there are pros and cons to having both. If you want to have a hood, go for the version that has the hood, no problem. But the big advantage of not having a hood is when you've got a low collar like this one, if you're wearing it underneath a waterproof or another jacket, then it's a lot easier to tuck this away because you don't have all that kind of excess material flapping about. So that can be seen as an advantage too. The Decathlon also does a version without a hood too. So that's not really a pro or a con with either. It's just a point of note. Now, the disadvantage with this jacket, the final one that I found, is it doesn't have any kind of draw cord in the hem. So you can't kind of cinch this down to stop any kind of wind from getting in. And I think that is a bit of a disadvantage, but objectively the jacket is still warmer, even though it doesn't have that. Another thing to note is this one just has very plain, simple, elasticated cuffs at the end. Now, these are functional and they work, but they're definitely not as refined as the kind of Decathlon implementation where they've got an elastic set inside the cuff here, some way inside. And the difference is when I'm wearing the Decathlon jacket and I've got thin gloves on, then this cuff, because it's not elasticated at the very end, it falls naturally on the outside of the glove, which is really nice. You can put this on the outside of the glove, but you've just got to kind of move it on. It's not a big deal, but it is just an extra faff and something to be aware of. Like the Decathlon Down Jacket, this one has been designed to be lightweight, and so the outer fabric on here is very thin. And that means it's not going to be suitable for kind of bushcraft use or kind of walking your dog if you've got to push through brambles and bushes to pick up after them, unless you wear it kind of under a smock or a waterproof coat. That said, the big difference with this jacket is because it is so cheap, I find I'm wearing it on my dog walks anyway, because I'm not so concerned about it getting ripped because it's relatively inexpensive to replace. So, in summary, is this a good jacket and is it better than the Down Decathlon jacket? Well, I think the first part of this is really easy to answer. Yes, it is. It's warm, it'll keep me warm when it gets wet, it's relatively windproof, it is relatively lightweight, and it packs down into a relatively small size. And for the price, it's an absolute steal for £23. It'd be worth much more than this, I think. Now, is it better than the Down Decathlon jacket? Well, I think that's more a matter of opinion because it depends on what you value most. If you value weight and packability, then this probably isn't going to be for you. But if you value that kind of practicality and that kind of warmth aspect, then this is definitely the best jacket. What I can tell you is I own both jackets, and so far in December, I am definitely choosing this jacket more than they am the Down Decathlon one. That said, I think come the summer, when I'm just looking for something to throw into my rucksack rather than something I'm actively wearing, then I think the down jacket might just find its way into my bag more often than this one then. Now, I've talked a lot about this jacket without actually revealing who it's by, and that was done very deliberately because I wanted you to judge the jacket on its merits rather than its brand name. And the brand isn't one you consider to be an outdoor brand at all. It's actually by George from Asda. And for those of you outside the UK, Asda is just a local supermarket. I think actually owned by Walmart now, and George is their clothing line. So I'm not saying this is the best jacket in the world, but what I hope to show you is that you don't need to spend a fortune and you don't need to get a big name brand in order to get good quality kit that's going to keep you nice and warm. So I hope that was useful, and hopefully I'll see you next time.